everybody? Papa Wigs and Wigs back here with you, and we're gonna break down PPR wide receivers 31 through 60. Let's jump right into it.
We'll start things on off here with Brandin Cooks of the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, after looking at where I have him ranked, I think maybe I probably had him a little low. So he's definitely probably going to jump up in my, updated receiver rankings, especially given the fact that CD's in the middle of a stalemate with his contract right now. I gotta believe the Cowboys are going to sign CD. I just don't see that it's not going to happen. But in the case that they don't, that's obviously going to boost up Brandin Cooks. Listen, I think Brandin Cooks is, he's a decent receiver. I kind of think that he's been a little overrated some years. He's been not really injury prone, but he had a couple. When in his earlier in his career, he did. He popped off, had four over 1,000-yard seasons between the Saints, New England, and the Rams. Then he had an off season because I think he was probably he was out a couple games. Then he jumped back up, had a couple decent seasons with Houston, and that I believe was with Watson. If I remember.
I think one of the years was, and then they had Mills or whatever before Stroud.
Right. So, but the last 2 years, last year with the Cowboys and the year before that with the Texans, he got a lot of targets. He just didn't get a lot of yards, or last year he had 8 touchdowns.
Yep.
So last year was better from a touchdown perspective, but he only had 54 receptions, 657 yards. Listen, I think Brandin Cooks is, definitely a decent receiver. And is helpful to his team. From a fantasy perspective, though, to me, he's nothing more than a potential, bye week option, injury replacement type guy. You definitely could have him on your bench because there's always the off chance that he pops up. This year could be a prime example, depending on what goes on with CD. Kind of stay tuned on that. Once you agree, Wiggs.
Yeah, and I think something I want to bring up too is the years that he's been good, he's been behind another good receiver. So
yeah, we talked about that the other day.
For example, like Michael Thomas there on the Saints, and then I think the only team he wasn't behind a good receiver was on New England there, because I don't think they had anyone big named on the team at that time, unless Moss was still there. I don't think he was though, was he?
I don't remember.
But then he went to the Rams and he was behind Cooper Kupp. So there's potential for pop off. In some of those years, he did finish top 15. We might have him really low here on the list, especially if CeeDee Lamb holds out for any period of time at the start of the season, or any screwy stuff like that ends up happening. But
I could see him jumping up. You had him at 48. Yeah. I had him at 70. Maybe mid 50s, potential a little bit higher depending on
he could
CD
break top 30 too if he has a year like he did behind Michael Thomas or anyone like that. It's just Dak Prescott went CeeDee Lamb's way a lot last year. So
yeah, I don't know. We'll see. It'll be interesting, and I think it all plays out what happens with CD. So, like I said, stay tuned for that. I definitely don't, I certainly wouldn't depend on him even as a flex option, right now. Like I said, to me, he's more of a draft, put on the bench, see what happens with CD, see how he plays out the first couple games, before you determine what you want to do with him. Definitely a bench guy, but to me, he's more of a bye week replacement or injury replacement if something happens, with like CD or some of your other guys, and you need to plug somebody in a desperate mode.
Yeah, and a lot of these guys here from probably the 40 to 60 spot are either going to be your bench or possible flex guys here, because you're going to have 2 starters possible third. So Mike Williams up next of the Jets.
Yeah, we were really close on this one. Um, Listen, Mike Williams to me has all the talent in the world. He had, he had 2 years with the Chargers where he had over 1,000 yards. And but the last few years he's struggled with injuries. Last year he only played three games. The year before he only played 13. So, um, he's a big guy, 6'4", definitely a huge, threat in the end zone if you can. I mean, the one year, 20, he had 2 years where he had one is a sophomore year he had 10 TDs, and then 3 years ago he had 9 TDs. So he's definitely a guy that can be a threat. I think um, if he stays healthy, and that's a big if, having Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback, having Garrett Wilson there, also, Lazard's there. I think that he has the potential to, have a decent year. But again, he's got to be out on the field, and he's dealing with something. I know he's quite, he's questionable right now. I don't think he played. Um, he didn't play in their game yesterday, I believe it was. So that's where I ranked him where he is. I think he's probably good right here, with the caveat of he could definitely move up at any given point, depending on where we see he falls out and if he stays healthy. I mean, would you agree with that, Wiggs?
Yeah, I think the reason we ranked him so low is because of his state of health year to year. He's only really had, I think, 2 or 3 seasons where he's played the entirety of the season. But then, other than that, he's always missed some sort of games. And if he stays healthy, he's easily like a guy I could see breaking that top 30 mark as a wide receiver too on the Jets behind Garrett Wilson. He's had successful years behind Keenan Allen there in the Chargers offense, so it's not far fetched for him to be up there at all. And for me, this is someone I still could see people like taking a risk on as a possible flex player when healthy. When he's not healthy, it's just kind of
Yeah,
hard
right
to
now,
rank him.
right now, I think there's better options for a flex until you see he's a definitely draft. You gotta
Yeah,
definitely draft a guy and stuff. I think initially though, my recommendation would be, if you're looking at a flex option, you may want to wait and see, how he pans out. Given other options on your bench, you may have better options. Who knows? If he comes out and he starts healthy this year and Rodgers starts to find him, then yeah, that's definitely gonna boost him up there. But I think it all depends on his health, and given the fact that he's already dealing with some stuff right now, makes me a little nervous about him, and that's why I ranked him where I did.
yeah, and if he stays healthy and something happened to Garrett Wilson, he could easily step up in his shoes. But at the end of the day, it's a health factor. I'd only draft him in case I needed some sort of depth or just to have him in case Wilson got hurt at any point. But other than that, he's borderline flex, mainly a bench player right now until we see him on the field again. Curtis Samuel.
Yeah, so Samuel, he's an interesting guy. Last year when he was with Washington, he didn't have a bad year. I mean, he had 62 receptions for over 600 yards and 4 touchdowns. So I think he's definitely, um, now that he's on the Bills team, he's a guy that I think you got to keep your eye on, and stuff. So, uh, because obviously they've got Shakir, who, showed he showed some spurts last year. Um, I think it's a stretch to say that he's their wide receiver one. That's I think where they got him. listed on the depth chart. I definitely think Keenan Coleman is going to have a huge impact this year. He's probably one of the rookies that are in one of the better situations, given that he's got Josh Allen throwing to him and stuff, and their wide receiver depth. But I do think Curtis Samuel has the potential to move up. I'm just not really comfortable with any of the Buffalo receivers this year, to be quite honest with you. The guy that I'm the highest on is Coleman, because I think he's the one that has the most upside. And given the fact that Samuel's switching over to a new team, he's got to develop that chemistry with Allen and stuff like that. So I definitely think he's a guy that should be drafted later in the round. You'd have on the bench. I wouldn't rely on him in any level of confidence to put in as a flex at this point. I think it's just kind of a wait and see with him.
Yeah, I think anyone really on this Bills offense right now is just kind of a risk. It'll be nice to draft them on the off chance that Josh Allen does find a connection with any of them, but just know that most likely with any of these receivers really from the Bills offense, you're gonna have them on your bench. You might have a possible flex week. I know Samuel last year, for a few weeks there, you could plug him in as a flex and he kind of popped off. But it's a risk. And you do have Keon Coleman coming in. I think Keon Coleman will be that wide receiver one with ease. I think Curtis Samuel and Shakir will be that 2-3, kind of interchangeable. It'll kind of be like Shakir and Gabe Davis last year. But yeah, I think Keon Coleman will be that wide receiver one, and I think Curtis Samuel is probably going to be in that 2 or 3 range. And you never know. Samuel could pop off. Allen's going to have to figure out something in his offense this year with his receivers. So,
well, I think he could have a similar year that he did last year, with the potential upside of maybe him and Allen develop that chemistry,
yeah.
and so to me there's upside with him. Once we see what kind of chemistry that they divide, because really, I know that Marquez Valdez Scantling hasn't been doing that great. They haven't been happy with him in training camp. They've got Mac Hollins, and I don't know if you guys remember him. He played for the Raiders. He's actually a decent guy, but outside of those two guys, I just don't see a lot of other guys threatening Samuel or to in regards to keeping him off the field. So he definitely has upside.
Move on though from Samuel, we will go to Wan'Dale Robinson.
Boy, this is another guy that I might have ranked a little bit low, because again, I'm not a huge Danny Dimes, fan, or Daniel Jones fan. I think that the Giants made a huge mistake paying him all that money. I don't think that they're gonna be playing from behind a lot this year. I feel so. To me, that's from a fantasy perspective, that's always a good thing, because that means that they're gonna be throwing the ball. Given the fact that they got Neighbors, who I think, again, Neighbors, even though he probably didn't want to go to the Giants, from a standpoint of production, I think Neighbors is definitely in a good situation where he's going to get a lot of opportunity to showcase himself. And with that said, I think that's going to open up things with Robinson, because the Giants really never had a true number one, and I think Neighbors is going to be that guy. Maybe not initially, but I think with Robinson, he has the potential to have a decent year. I know last year he had 60 catches for 525 yards. He really wasn't a red zone threat because of Barkley. That could change though, because they don't have Barkley this year. I don't really consider Singletary a huge red zone threat, so I could see them throwing in the red zone more. They lost, their tight end Waller, who retired. So I look at at Robinson the same way as I do Samuel. I think that there's a lot of upside here, just for the potential of the Giants. I think are going to have to throw a lot this year. I think they're going to be coming from behind. They're going to have to throw the ball. I don't, I think they're going to struggle in their running game. And outside of Neighbors, they've got a couple other guys. I mean, they got Isaiah McKenzie. He was on the Bills last year. He's okay. But Wan'Dale, he showed that he has the talent, and the speed and stuff. So I think 57 is probably a good spot for him. I might have had him ranked a little bit low. I think Wiggs probably got it a little bit closer than I did, and stuff, because I do think that there's the potential. I think he could be a borderline flex guy, just given the situation with the Giants, because it's a little bit different than the Bills. But I would wait and see. If you got better options, you certainly would start them first. See where he kind of pans out the first game or two in the season before you make a decision. But he's definitely somebody that needs to be on a bench somewhere, because he has a lot of potential. I mean, wouldn't you agree, Wiggs?
Yeah, he's got a lot of upside, and he's shown sparks in the last 2 years. It's just never been consistent because of the quarterback play. And last year, it's not fully on him. They had 2 separate injuries at quarterback. Ended up with Tommy DeVito, and I mean, nothing against DeVito, but he wasn't the answer. And really, yeah, it's just been bad quarterback play. Like Neighbors and Robinson both could have pretty good years, and I do agree they're probably going to be playing from behind in the majority of the games. And you look at their schedule from a rushing standpoint, it's looking brutal there for Singletary. He's going to have a rough year in my eyes. I could see Tracy picking up some slack there. If anything, I see Tracy taking away maybe some red zone runs, because from what I've seen video wise, he looks like he's a bit bulkier than Singletary, so I could totally see them putting him in there for anything within the 5 or 7. So aside from that, though, Neighbors and Robinson should be those guys. You might see an occasional flash from Slayton or Hodgins. You do have Allen Robinson now as well, so the third spot's kind of up in the air, even that 4th spot. So
oh yeah, I forgot about Slayton. I should have mentioned him. Yeah, they do have Slayton. I don't know. I think there's more upside with McKenzie, because McKenzie showed some spurts with the Bills, but I think, but out of Slayton and Robinson,
Robinson's kind of.
I think Robinson's got more upside. Got more upside. So, and he's young.
And he'll be a deep threat. He's 5'8", and from what we've seen the last few years, he's a pretty quick receiver. It kind of reminds me of, kind of like an Addison speed wise, just not as talented or hasn't shown it yet.
Well, he's just not been in as good a situation. Yeah. So,
but any of these guys so far, I'd say borderline flex if you needed them, but definitely bench to probably begin the year. Adam Thielen.
Man, I love Adam Thielen. As you guys know, I'm a huge Vikings fan from Minnesota. I mean, everybody in Minnesota loved Adam Thielen. I was a bit surprised at the production that he had last year. I didn't think that he was going to do that. I really didn't. He had 100 receptions, over 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns. So I to be honest, I was shocked. I don't think he's going to have that same production this year. I think that they brought in Deontay Johnson. They drafted Leggett, pretty high in the draft. They still do have Terrence Marshall. They do have Jonathan Mingo, Amir Smith-Marset, who is another guy that used to play for the Vikings that I know well. But I love him. I think that he's a grizzled veteran. Do I think he's going to have over 1,000 yards this year? No. I don't think he's going to have over 1,000 yards. Do I think he's going to have a decent year? I think that, he'll have an okay year. I think there's always the potential that he could break off and maybe get 1,000 yards. I just don't see him getting 100 receptions this year and being targeted 137 times with Deontay Johnson and Leggett there. I really don't. The Panthers went out and they really strengthened their offense this year. the new regime that came in, they drafted a running back, they drafted a wide receiver, they brought in Deontay Johnson. They really filled a lot of holes on offense, and Adam's going to be that veteran leader on the team. But um, I don't, I know a lot of people have him in the top 50. I think that's a stretch. I'm not saying it couldn't happen. I just don't see it happening, especially with Deontay John. I think Deontay is going to come in and he's going to have a rebound year. So I think Adams going to have maybe 50, 60 receptions, maybe 600 yards, and possibly, 3 to 4 touchdowns. Um, you definitely could consider him a flex option, borderline flex option, but I think it's kind of wait and see with him. Once these other receivers come in there. So, I mean, he could surprise everybody. I could be totally wrong. I just don't think he's gonna have a repeat of last year.
No, he's definitely not, especially with Deontay coming in. I could see him getting anywhere from 60 to 70 reception, or not reception. I think he's going to get around like 70-ish targets, maybe 75, with maybe like 55 to 60 receptions next year. Because they, like you said, they did draft a young receiver in Leggett, which I think will chip away at his production as well. But who knows? Bryce Young did have a pretty solid connection with them last year. Like, yeah, it didn't pan out when it came to touchdowns. Only 4 touchdowns there, but really overall, it's gonna come down to what connection he still has with Bryce Young, and I think Deontay will have a pretty solid year. And like you said, who knows? He could come out and surprise us. Maybe it's just him and Deontay running that offense. They're the receivers, and they both go for over 1,000 or something. But which I could totally see happening. I have Bryce Young ranked pretty high on my quarterbacks right now. I think he'll have a pretty good year. So for all we know, he could throw for over 4,000, and 2 guys on that team could be Deontay and Thielen. So
I think there's some upside, but I just don't see a repeat of last year. So, and personally, I think some of these other guys that are ranking him higher are basing that off of his production last year, and I really don't think that they're. I really just don't see it. I just see that he's going to have a drop off. He's not a spring chicken anymore. So he's going to be turning, 34. He's 33 right now. So he's getting up there in years. So, yeah, I definitely think he's going to have a drop off.